Welcome to the Parent Zone Perspective on Therapy podcast, where we dive into the heartfelt journeys of parents navigating therapy with their children. This podcast is a safe space for sharing real life experiences, insights, and the unique challenges that come with supporting a child's growth. Whether you're a parent, therapist, or simply interested in understanding the therapy journey, each episode provides honest perspectives to inform, inspire, and connect us all. Join us as we explore the many pathways of parenting through therapy, one story at a time. As we begin, I'd like to acknowledge the Whadjuk Noongar people, the traditional custodians on the land which this podcast is recorded. I recognise their enduring connection to land, sea, and community, and I pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. I also extend my respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples listening today and honour their ongoing contributions to our shared culture and knowledge. Today, I'm really excited to welcome Sarah to this podcast. I've known Sarah for a few years now and have in moments of time just been able to get to know her and love her. And I'm really excited to have her here to share her story with us. So Sarah, welcome. Thank you for joining us. And would you like to start by telling us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Thanks, Di. Thanks for having me as well. So, my name's Sarah. I have an 8-year-old son, Lucas, who has, in the last year or so, recently we diagnosed with ASD, so autism spectrum disorder, with a level 2. Previously to this, he'd been diagnosed with ADHD. And prior to this, from a very young child, he always had issues around his ears, his sleeping difficulties, and just general upper respiratory difficulties. So from very early age, we were aware that there was something going on with him that needed a bit of extra assistance. So that's sort of Lucas. He's a rambunctious, awesome child. Loves the world, loves learning, loves people. Has his own unique twist and take on things. I also have a husband who's supportive. He's also fly out, so that's a unique situation for our family.
Yep.
And I'm also I'm a professional, so I'm an environmental scientist. I work in the environmental approval space and the regulatory space, so I have a pretty intense, full-on career that I'm very passionate about.
Yeah.
So sort of as a family unit, we love just trying to spend time together with friends and family as much as we can in this chaotic world that we live in these days. And I think our biggest sort of the thing that resonates with me, Lucas's diagnosis and the support he just needs on a general day-to-day basis, and how we've connected with people like Di and others in the allied health industry have really resonated or impacted our lives. As an aside, I'm also an adult who has recently been diagnosed with ADHD in the last couple of years since Lucas was diagnosed, and I've also just recently got my own autism diagnosis. So yeah, it's been full on for us recently.
That is pretty full on.
Yeah, so that's just a little bit about us.
Thank you for sharing that. When you cast your mind back, so Lucas is 8 now, but I think he was about 3 or so when I met you. And at that point in time, I think you were starting the journey of looking for speech therapy at CDS or something like that. But can you go even further back and tell us when you realized that Lucas might need speech therapy or other kinds of therapy?
So for us, it was really identified initially with our ENT. Because I previously mentioned Lucas, he was a shocking sleeper. He was getting chronic ear infections. And one of the, first-time parent things you never knew was that I never realised that a child didn't wake up screaming in pain, crying.
Right, yeah.
Our first sort of notion that something wasn't quite right was like he would wake up and he would wake up screaming. So he was waking up in pain. And that was when he had blockages. So his airways were blocked and his ears were bursting and all that sort of stuff. So
Yeah.
that was sort of the our early segue into he never slept. He was always like waking up in pain. And everyone was like, do the control crying method. And I was like, no. And then that's when your instincts kick in. So that's when we was like, let's get this sorted out. So we went to an ENT
Right.
and straight away the ENT was like, yes, we've got some issues to deal with. He was 23 months, I think.
Mhm.
So he was really little when we first
Yeah.
went. So he was only just developing his speech.
Yeah.
Um, so he had, I think he was that, so he had his adenoids out and grommets in. And when he got his grommets in, that's when we went and saw the audiologist as part of the ENT. And it was the
Mhm.
audiologist and the ENT together that was like, continued follow up with those guys, grommets, and referred us to a speech therapist.
Right.
Because even early on, it was, he probably had some very slight hearing loss
Mm.
in those developmental years. So I think that has also, over the years, impacted his ability in speech in particular. Um, at that point in time, prior to going to CDS, we did see a private speech therapist.
Okay.
Um, I honestly didn't really understand or really know what everything was about right back then. It was a very full-on time for all of us.
Mm.
Lucas wasn't sleeping, I wasn't sleeping, I was working, and I just didn't really know what we were meant to be getting out of it. We didn't have a great GP. We didn't really have any other third party versus the ENT just going to go and see a speechy. So
Mm.
we sort of went in with no support whatsoever. We did that speech for maybe 6 months.
Right.
And this is before he was at school. So he was just at daycare doing this speech.
Mhm.
Um, and we didn't see any progress. It was costing us an arm and a leg. We're getting no support. We didn't really have a great repertoire with the speechy that we were seeing. We weren't seeing any improvements from what we were doing. So we gave that away and just said, we'll have a break. He was starting school the next year. So we left it, and then we went when he started kindy. He's a May baby, so he was 3.5 when he
Oh,
started
so
kindy. He's a little
little.
bubba. Yeah, little issues. None of the other diagnoses were there yet, but he had a brilliant kindy teacher
Oh, yay.
who had a real interest in early intervention and speech as well as being an early childhood teacher. She flagged very on with us his delays in speech and then the impacts it could have. And she referred us through the child health nurse through the education department system. And we were
Okay.
very lucky because it was actually just when COVID was hitting. And for some
Oh,
reason, we were able to get in, and we had a couple of sessions before all the lockdown started.
right.
And then once we were in the system, I think we were in the system within 6 months, which is pretty
Wow,
crazy
that's
back
pretty
then.
amazing.
Yeah, we were
Unheard
very
of.
fortunate. Yeah, we were very fortunate there. Um, but between when he was sort of 2 to 3.5 to poor kindy, I'd also had exposure with a lot of my friends, like yourself and our other
Mhm.
friends that we know that have children that have these special needs and
Mhm.
seek therapy or need therapy. And it was through that education, through my mum network and my friend network, that I really was educated about what it was all about,
Yeah.
where the
Yeah.
benefits were, and then
Yeah.
also my own self-education. So that was sort of how our journey began. And we were
Mhm.
just really lucky that all the therapists we saw through CDS for speech were amazing.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
When can I go back to that very beginning when the ENT referred you to speech? And you touched on it before when you said that you just didn't really know what to expect or what it was all about. How did that make you feel? That kind of going through it blindly almost. How did that make you feel?
It was very confronting. And then
Mm.
it was sort of, you just feel like you're launched, thrown out there with no support, no nothing.
Mm.
You front up to these specialists. They charge you an arm and a leg. You go for 3 or 6 months, you see no change whatsoever, and I just felt helpless. I felt like I was getting ripped off.
Mm.
Um, it was just one of those yeah, you almost lose faith in the system.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so that was quite, I do reflect back now and go, oh, what if we'd just stuck with it? Or what if we had a different speech? Or what if we'd picked up on
Yeah.
things earlier?
Yeah.
Um, so I
Coulda,
suppose
woulda, shoulda, right? You can't change that.
exactly. You
Yeah,
can't
but
change
and
that.
it's interesting. I think that's really important to acknowledge that feeling of helplessness. I think we get a lot of
Oh,
parents who do come in feeling that way. So yeah, I understand where that feeling might have come from.
and it's, I think something that I've always struggled as well is that, well, spade to spade with me, I'm an intelligent person. Like I understand.
Yeah,
My mother was in special education for 35, 40 years. So we're
yeah.
exposed to a lot of it. And that's a whole nother thing to unpack. But I think it's also it's like, well, if we can't navigate this system or understand why we aren't getting what we sort of think we should be getting, what's going on. And I think that's one of the key things that we've also discovered is the benefit of having a really good family GP. Because we
Yeah,
had inconsistent GPs
yeah,
until for a long time, and just not having that one central source to start with on your journey. Or
absolutely.
so whether it's a GP or whether it's a different allied health professional that you can have that relationship and repertoire with that has the time and energy to actually help you through
Mm,
is where again it's really hard because I don't think the system or the government that or the resources they're just not really out there or as available as they could be.
mm.
And this is why I think it's really important. And thank you for having me on to share these experiences as
Oh,
parents.
yeah, thank you. So we've gone through, he went into CDS and he had CDS for a little while. Was that until he turned 7 and aged out of CDS, or was that until he got his autism diagnosis? Which came first?
So we had an interesting journey with
Okay.
CDS. So, because initially Lucas was just referred for general speech delays, and then it became very apparent he had a stutter. So we
Mm-hmm.
went through intensive stutter therapy for about 12 to 18 months with one of the
Right.
senior speechies there.
Okay.
He got through the program and he does brilliantly now. So that was, I think, one of the things for us, that was probably the first time that we'd done therapy and then there was like achievable outcomes that you could see. It what didn't happen overnight. It was a long journey, but it was sort of also when things clicked that therapy does help.
Okay.
Like if you put the time and energy in, you're going to get something out of it. So that was that sort of aha moment.
Mm.
So that would have been from, I think, kindy, pre-primary to sort of year one-ish.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then it was year one who was diagnosed with ADHD. And
Mm-hmm.
we did that through the school using the school
Oh,
psychs and
wow.
then got a referral to PED.
Yeah.
He helped us through that. But it was also his kindy teacher initially, tracking back, is when she referred him for speech at the end of kindy. She also recommended that we put our name forward for a OT clinic
Mm-hmm.
that was run by Curtin University, Curtin ECU, I think it was ECU, one of the universities out of Joondalup Hospital,
Yeah.
where it was over their summer program and it was to back students with experienced trained professionals partnered together to
Mm-hmm.
go through. I cannot remember the name of the program, but we did this program and it was fully funded, and it was that led us to start building this. There's something more going on in the
Okay.
background.
Right.
And the OT, the first thing she picked up was his vision and
Mm-hmm.
that he wasn't tracking properly in his eyes.
Right.
So so I think her recommendations were pediatric ophthalmologist,
Mm-hmm.
OT, continue with the speech, seek further diagnosis,
Right.
issues with fine motor, issues with strength, core, everything that we now know is probably associated with autism and ADHD.
Yes.
So,
Yeah.
but that was when he was 4.5, and it took
Mm-hmm.
us to 8 to get through
Yeah.
the whole diagnostic process.
Wow. That is a long time, isn't it?
And that's privately as well,
Mm.
most of it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's never a short journey, I don't think.
I don't think so. No, it isn't. And I think in the process of that, you've probably had some massive challenges. You, I can see your face. Um, would you be happy to share some of the biggest challenges that you and Lucas have faced during your therapy journey and maybe also expand on how you work through them together?
I think the first one is actually just getting on book somewhere, finding a therapist so I can
Mm,
not being picky or choosy. And we've just been really fortunate that most of the therapists that we've landed with have just worked for us.
yeah.
There's been a few that haven't along the way.
Hmm.
And I suppose it's the challenges is having the time and the space and the personal capacity to actually be able to like look into what resources are available, where how to get what are your options. Like
Mm,
we were really fortunate that we had CDS and we had that speech access for so long.
yeah.
I think we actually, thinking back, I think when we first came out of that ECU process, when he'd been doing speech for about 6 months, and we had that OT, that's when he first went on a wait list and it took us 3 years to get into that OT.
Oh,
So,
wow.
and the first OT we actually got, because we was limited being FIFO, my
Mm,
husband, me working pretty much full time,
mm,
um, trying to actually find the time to be able to go and take the time off work or my husband to be home to take Lucas to the appointments was a massive challenge in itself. So
yeah.
it was basically no providers, you get what you can get and you just take it, knowing that I think this is where people need to like, yeah, you take what you can get, but stick it out because once you're when you're in, if it's not the right fit, you can there's workarounds. So sort of
Yeah.
that'll be my advice. It sounds really bad, but take what you
Oh,
can
I
get,
think I
utilize
understand
that,
where you're
and
coming
then
from, and that's
you'll
your,
find the right people and the right
yeah,
fit.
yeah.
Like the first OT we had wasn't a great fit for us.
Mm,
Initially, I thought it'd be great because it was a male OT. And I thought,
hmm.
awesome, my boy is going to get this great male therapist and I can't even think of the word now. Figurehead. I can't think of the
Hmm.
word.
Role model.
That's it.
Hmm. Hmm.
um, through this therapy journey, and it wasn't the right fit for us.
Mm,
Um, and that therapist ended up leaving the practice.
right.
We were paired up with another OT, and she is just brilliant.
Wow. There you go.
Is
Yeah.
is
So it
yeah, and
did
it's
work
just
out for you.
it does work out, and it's just I think the hardest thing is you just can't give up.
Yeah.
You've got to try, and you've got to stick it out. It's always challenging. It's always hard, but it's the persistence and the like. You've got to persevere through stuff, and eventually you'll find the right fit, find the right
Mm,
people. Yeah. So one of the months we were in with OT, um, we'd had the ADHD diagnosis.
hmm.
And then that's when we also had started looking into ASD
Hmm.
once Lucas had been medicated, and we were seeing really great outcomes through. I mentioned getting glasses, so he
Hmm.
really struggled with speech and literacy,
Yeah.
and focus
Yeah.
in class as a child, and that was a really big thing. He's also a people pleaser. He's Gentile. He loves learning.
Mm,
He hates authority or he hates being in trouble. So he really always strives to show respect to authority. So he was never a troublemaker. He wasn't hyperactive. He's definitely combined type.
hmm.
He's a quiet one. He's the one that internalizes everything. So that was
Yeah.
hard for him as well because he was silently struggling
Yeah.
for him. And then the older he got, the more he realized he was different to other kids.
Right.
And then he also, it was a good thing, but a bad thing, because he was in the same class for kindy and pre-primary. A lot of the kids learned like how to understand him and interpret him, and they would speak for him or
Okay.
translate for him, and the teachers got quite frustrated because like he would try, but then the other kids are sort of like, yeah, it was the whole so many different challenges that we faced.
Yeah. And like I can hear what you're saying about that being a good thing and a bad thing. Good thing is just how amazing and supportive those peers are, that they would, they know him, they jump in, they support him to communicate in whatever way he is communicating. But at the same time, not necessarily giving him the space to communicate all of what he wants to say, just jumping in for him.
And funnily enough, that's something now that we actually have to work on with
Right.
him, that people spoke to him for so long that he does suppress a lot of things. So
Yeah.
to actually get him to voice his own feelings and his own verbalize what he's trying to say is quite a struggle
Yeah.
now. So again, it's all hindsight. But in terms of where he got to, like that first OT, I just think where would be without her that we saw, because she was able to refer us. He had issues tracking an eye. He got glasses, and all of a sudden he could actually. He's like, "Oh, mum, the words don't like blur on the page. The letters aren't coming at me anymore."
Wow. Isn't that amazing?
And
Hey.
this is year one, and I'm like, oh, the guilt that I felt as a parent was just like, oh, why didn't we
Yeah.
know this earlier?
Yeah.
So,
But also, maybe on the flip side, could be thank goodness you found it in year one
yes,
and it
I
wasn't.
love how you've done that. Always put a positive on it. No, yeah, but it really
And
was. It
because
was so great to get input in.
year one is quite early in the journey. It might not have felt like it for you, but from my point of view, when I'm seeing a lot of families that are coming to me much later than year one, only first identifying difficulties, you've been able to get to those and get some of those things. And like you say, it's not like you haven't been trying to figure things out since he was 3. So
Well, even before then, to be honest, like yeah,
yeah,
he was little, and he was always like you look back now, and he was always the last to walk, the last to walk, talk, the last to crawl.
yeah,
Like he
yeah.
was just
All
had
those
those the
milestones.
little
Yeah,
delays, but then he was always like, apart from sleeping, he was a happy, content baby. So
yeah,
it's really
absolutely.
hard.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, what do you think? How do you think therapy has impacted the relationship that you have with Lucas?
That's a really hard one. I think
Right.
it's been really good for us. He's always
Ooh.
loved going to his therapist, but I think one of the biggest difficulties we've had, especially in the last year or so, um, and for us especially, it's sort of been when he got diagnosed with ADHD, and then it took us about 6 months to decide we were actually going to medicate him. And
Mhm.
then once we did medicate him, which was halfway through year one, well, term one, term 4 in year one to term 1 in year 2.
Mhm.
And that's when it was like light bulb movement.
Mm.
Everything comes to light. But it was also once he was medicated for ADHD that his autism traits really started to show through.
Mhm.
And that's where the speech was really good, sort of from you can notice it because it was things like a stutter, it was pronunciation, it was really obvious things for Lucas on his journey that like people would just, everyone could see it. It wasn't when you get to something like autism, which is like an invisible disability where it's not as easy to explain or differentiate it for people to see what's going on in
Mm.
him. So
Yeah.
speech was great for him. And also he felt really rewarded. So we had a great journey within that first couple of years with speech because he loved doing it. He could see that he could get his communicate, like he'd communicate what he wanted to.
Mm.
He would, he loved it. And then as he got a bit older and the autism traits were more and more obvious, when he could understand he was different to other kids, he could understand that he struggled with literacy,
Right.
but he's intelligent, so he's good at maths, or he can comprehend what's going on. But when you have to write it down, that's what he's like. he got really, or he just still does, gets really frustrated because he can think it, he can speak it, but he can't write it in a test, or he
Mm.
can't. He struggles with certain concepts, but then in
Yeah.
other concepts, he's just like his vocab is out of this world,
Mm. Mm.
using really out there terms in the right context.
Mm.
Yeah, at 8, he still struggles with like the difference between ch and the k, ck sounds. So
Mhm.
it's sort of 2 steps forward, 1 step back. And I think that's sort of, we've always had a bit of a mixed journey and mixed ride.
Mm.
But it's definitely helped us in our relationship in understanding each other, understanding where his struggles are, and not just the actual one-on-one therapy with the child in the sessions. It's the support you get from your allied health workers on the periphery as well. It's the
Yeah.
communications, it's attending the sessions, it's the having the to and fro's sort of in the background or by emails or phone calls and stuff. It's the whole package that's really helped us and
Mm.
we've
Yeah,
benefited
that's
from.
good. That's really good. I think in the process of all of that, it seems to me that you've really been able to identify what Lucas's strengths are, what things he's really good at. And you know, and yes, he's got challenges in those certain areas, but I really value how you've been also mentioning how he is good at maths and he's super intelligent, his vocabulary is amazing. It's really lovely to hear you highlighting those strengths that he's got along the way.
Oh, thanks. It's a hard one as well.
Well, it is hard to sometimes realize because when you are so deep into assessments and
Mm.
therapy processes and at school IEPs and meetings with
Oh yeah,
teachers and meetings with all these people, sometimes it's actually really hard to stop and notice that those strengths are there. And because often we're quite focused on what are the challenges all the time. So, um, yeah.
yeah. And this is one of the reasons that we really struggled with on the school side of things
Mm.
around he wasn't naughty. He was a little bit disruptive, but again, he'd
Mm.
also learned to mask and like pretty cottoned on pretty quickly that just shut up, like internalize it, sit there. He'd come
Yeah.
home. One of his stimming things is scratching. He's got really bad eczema and he's
Oh,
allergic to mozzies and bites. So he just comes home ripped to shreds from picking. And that's when you're like, that's when I know that he's struggling because that's his way of internalizing everything. And the teacher's like, oh no, he's fine. He participates. He joins in. He does this. He does that, or something. So it's hard. Like we always had to convince the school that he was autistic, and
yeah.
that was a real struggle for us.
Yeah.
And then you get the diagnosis, and they read the reports and the recommendations, and they're like, oh. Yeah, he totally is autistic. And you're like, oh my goodness. Like that was a big struggle for that's taken us like 4 years to overcome.
Yeah.
And even now we're struggling as well with the school system and what government or state education can actually do, where their limits are,
Mm.
and how Lucas's needs can be met. So we also have a really brilliant tutor that works with Lucas. She's an ex-special needs teacher.
Hmm.
And she's more than just let's sit down to a homework tutor. She works with him on speech, OT. She corresponds with his teacher twice a week, every session by email
Wow.
about what they did in their sessions, where he struggled, where he did well. If it was a good day, if it was a bad day, did the teacher recognize he was having a good day or a bad day? So just
Mm.
little things like that have been really like finding these professionals in our journey have been life changing for us. So
Yeah.
like she's been consistent with us and she's just really helped us navigate some of the other things. So like when you
Mm.
talk about like IEPs and like where should he we've gotten, like, I had no idea. I was like, well, how do I know where he should be at? He just keeps getting D's or not assessed or put
Mm.
on, like, IEPs and this stuff. And I was like, I never realized that not every kid got two reports. So again, there's a lot of challenges and a lot of gaps in knowledge across like child health services, education department,
Yeah.
private system. I mean, don't even get me started about NDIS, but
We might not talk about NDIS today.
no, but we're still,
We
and
might
like,
be here for 4 hours if we start talking about
oh,
NDIS.
well, still to this, so to this day, apart from the luck, and I just don't know how we just jagged really great people in CDS. We're still self-funded for the whole time.
Wow.
So
Still waiting for
still
NDIS.
waiting. Yeah, he's had a plan submitted since July. So
Okay.
because one of Lucas's biggest struggles, and this is where we're like, we know our limits, or we know what our financial limits are anyway. And he really struggles with the being taken out of school to go to therapies. And when I say you're going to take what you can get, it's like you can't get a 3:30 appointment, or you can't get an 8 a.m. appointment.
Mm.
It's going to be outside of school. That's not going to impact his learning day. But to us as well, therapies are so important to him, as well as education, that pulling him out of school is actually necessary for him to get access to those services.
Mm.
But he loves learning, and so it's so disruptive for him to leave school, go to an appointment, and then go back to school and resettle in and re-regulate, and like the amount of time it takes him to get himself out of the funk or like defrost between being taken out of school and then traveling to a therapist and whatever might happen in that half an hour journey and
Yeah.
then attending the therapy sessions. So um sort of that's where we're really hoping that we can improve our journey, is being able to actually get access to therapists that can go on site at school so it's less disruptive for him,
Less
is
disruptive.
where we're hoping to get to in the future.
Yeah. I think that's a fair goal.
Yeah, he
Yeah.
just, yeah, it's that those transitions and just being uprooted, or that's a real thing that he struggles with, and we also struggle with as well, because it has an impact on us when me and my husband are the one we're the baddies, we're the one pulling him out of school and sort of making him go to the therapies. But he loves them when he gets there, but it's just sort of like, oh, I have to miss this, or why can't I do that, or yeah.
And so how does that feel? Like you just said there, you and your husband like the baddies. How does that feel for you inside? Like what are all
Oh,
of those feelings
there's
about? Yeah.
constant guilt, and the struggle with it. You're trying to do the best for a
Mm.
child, but that push and pull.
The push and pull, the push and pull. And I feel like what you're telling me as well is that the guilt would be there kind of regardless, because it's either he stays at school and is settled in his day, but then he doesn't get access to his therapies.
Oh, exactly.
Um, or he gets access to his therapies, but in the process of that, you've got to be super disruptive. So it's like you're stuck between a rock and a hard place, aren't you?
Constantly.
Constantly, yeah. Constantly trying to weigh up where's the benefit, the benefit ratio happening, which the benefit
Yes.
versus the fight ratio, which is the greater in the situation at the moment in time.
And that's a constant part of me. It's a
Yeah.
constant battle, and um this is what happens. This is real
Yeah,
emotion that parents go through. And
absolutely.
it's nothing to be ashamed of. It's just how we process, or how I process anyway.
Mm,
But it's really it's the constant balancing act.
yeah.
And then for myself as well, um, being neurodivergent, it's you're in your own world of fight or flight, and then you're
Mm,
advocating for your child, you're supporting your child, and it's just a challenge.
Yeah.
But we're really fortunate that we do have support services and great network of friends, and all our independent allied health professionals have been really great
Mm,
recently. So in the last sort of 12 months to
yeah.
12 months to 2 years, where we've been doing more intensive therapies, has been,
Yeah.
yeah, really helped us.
That's great, because I was just going to say, I was just going to ask you if there've been any victories along the way, whether they're little tiny ones or big ones that stand out. Have there been any victories along the way through therapy?
Oh yeah, every nearly every session or every day,
Oh,
or things like we had a really small one recently with Luke's a psychologist,
yeah.
but he's really struggling with like emotions and how to express them, that they exist, that it's not bad to not, that it's okay not to be okay. It's really hard to say that to like for a child.
Yeah.
Um, and on the way to, we're doing Secret Santa at school, and we were talking about who he had, and he's like, "Oh, if someone gets me and I get a Pokemon toy that I've already got, I'm gonna be a bit angry. I'm gonna be a bit
Oh,
sad." And I was
oh,
like,
that's
"Oh,
so massive.
that was a win. That was
That was
a."
a win. That's a win. Yeah.
And we got to the therapist, and I said, "Oh, why don't we talk about how what you would do in that situation?" It was just like, boom, curtains are up, but the
But
victory was he could acknowledge he had feelings.
absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And you say that's a small thing, but I can also see how big that is,
Oh yeah.
because it's just starting and something that you've been working on for such a long time in
Oh
being
yeah.
able to, express or identify it even. And, just for him to be able to share that in not in the moment, but in like projecting what would happen in the future.
Yes. Yeah.
That's that's huge.
Yeah.
It's a big one, not a small one. Take that as a big one.
And that's also hard if you're not in that sort of professional yourself, and you're not um again, as a parent, you don't even know when your victories are big sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And sometimes also, do you find that it's a bit tricky, like something like what you've just shared with me might be tricky to share with other people, as you never believe what just happened today.
Oh yeah.
We just did this, because they'll be like, yeah,
No.
but isn't that there's there's something wrong with that if he's like not showing that he's grateful for getting a gift from somebody else and
And you're
going
like,
through. You're like,
that,
no, no.
that's not the point. That's a whole nother thing that we can deal with. That's
Yeah,
hard.
that's like you say, you went to the how do we deal with this, and you got the wall went up, but that wasn't the victory.
No.
That wasn't the victory. The victory was that he shared that how he might feel in that situation.
Oh, and that again, this is another whole thing about masking, and that's one of the things that he, again, it's I feel guilty because he's learned how to mask really well. And my guilt is, did he learn that from me? Or is it something he's developed himself? Or, and again, so much to unpack. But
So much to unpack.
yeah,
Yeah, I
that's
hear
also what's
you.
emotional, because it has been, it's a long, intense journey,
Yeah,
not just for
absolutely.
the child, but your whole family unit.
Oh, for sure. For sure. For sure. Now you've shared some pieces of advice through earlier on when you're saying, get get into somewhere and stick with it and work through it. Do you have any other words of encouragement for parents who are at the start of this journey, or
Oh, um, speak to anyone you can about everything,
mm,
because I think the greatest advice and support I've got has just been about not being scared to talk about what your struggles are or what your child's struggles are. And it's once you open up to others and you let people in that you actually get the right support that you need.
Yeah. Yeah, that is
Probably my biggest piece.
that is so valuable. I think that we sometimes do live in a society where perfectionism is put on a pedestal,
Oh.
and sometimes our children, okay, our children are never, never perfect. But sometimes it's really hard to acknowledge that to ourselves. And I think that comes certainly from me, from my personal thing, and you can correct me if I'm wrong from your point of view. But I think that that fear it comes from a place of fear of you not wanting the world to be a difficult place for
Oh,
your
yeah.
child's
Oh,
existence. Would
definitely.
you agree with that?
Yes, 100%. And
Mm,
then I think my added layer, as well as when you go into these diagnoses or the assessments and everything that you do with your child, is then that self-reflection or that self-awareness that you suddenly have that, oh, this is me too.
mm, mm,
So, and then there's a whole nother set of emotions and things going on in that space as well that
absolutely.
play into a lot. But um, it's definitely being open, being honest, um, celebrating, as you say, celebrating the wins, not being afraid to reach out when you are struggling or asking for help.
Yeah.
That was a big thing for me. Letting your
Mm,
guard down and asking for help.
biggie.
Massive. But
Yeah.
yeah.
That's where you've got the most support when you have been able to do that.
Oh yeah, because if you don't ask, you're not going to get it.
No, exactly right. Exactly right.
So
Oh, Sarah, I just thank you so much for taking the time to share this and being so raw and open and honest with us. Um, I know that there are going to be so many people who listen to this and find the connection and the support from you sharing your journey.
yeah.
So I really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
No, thank you for letting me share our journey, and hopefully it does help others with
Oh,
theirs, that they're not alone.
yeah, absolutely.
It's the
Absolutely.
biggest thing.
Thank you.
Thanks, Di.